We all love stories. Some way or another, we do. And no, I don't just mean books, I mean any type of story. That can be movies, shows, video games, books, and much more. No matter what you're looking at, there can always be a story to tell. The question is though, what is it about stories that resonate with us so much? And how do some stories tell their plot in ways that connect more with the viewer? Well, the answer to these questions lies in how the story is told. For what I'm highlighting today, I want to talk about Nintendo's 2015 IP, Splatoon. I'm sure many of you have at least heard of the Splatoon franchise. Most know it as the kids' game shooter by Nintendo, which is a reasonable way to view it from the surface level. There is much more to it under the surface though, so let's get into what it really is and why I think its way of telling stories is so good. Splatoon is a third-person shooter video game franchise created by Hisashi Nogami and Shintaro Sato, developed and owned by Nintendo. The first game in the franchise was just Splatoon and was released on May 28, 2015. It tends to mostly stand out among other shooter games due to its focus on appealing to all ages, including children. Instead of real guns and blood, Splatoon uses unreal and cartoony weapons that fire ink that the player characters, humanoid squids called Inklings, can swim in using their squid form, allowing for faster travel and refill on ink. It's an overall fast-paced game that innovates on the shooter genre by removing uninteresting parts of other shooter games, like reloading or movement issues. That's what brings in about half the fan base. At its core, it's an online multiplayer shooter meant for all ages, but it doesn't restrict itself to that. See, the characters aren't just squids for the sake of ink-based combat. They live in a fully realized world with a rich history, culture, and an evolving storyline. That's where the single-player campaigns of Splatoon come in. It would be easy to assume that the single players of these games would just be like the multiplayer modes but with bots, but they do have much more than that. In fact, the single player content and story of Splatoon is the entire other half of its identity. So let's give the rundown of Splatoon's timeline, but keep in mind that the smaller details are left out for now. Around 12,000 years before Splatoon 1, humanity and all mammals go extinct due to ecological disasters, climate change, and natural catastrophes. With humans gone, the Earth's remaining life evolves in new directions, leading sea creatures to develop into humanoid forms. Over thousands of years, the Inklings, squid-based, and the Octolings, octopus-based, emerge as the dominant intelligent species, creating civilizations reminiscent of human society. However, as land becomes scarce, tensions rise between the two species, culminating in the Great Terror War. The Inklings and Octarians violently battle for control, with the Octarians initially having the upper hand due to their advanced technology. However, the Inklings' adaptability and unconventional tactics turn the tide, forcing the Octarians into underground domes, once human shelters. The Inklings thrive on the surface, transforming ink-based battles into a sport, while the Octarians remain underground under the strict rule of DJ Octavio, who keeps them in a controlled, propaganda-driven society, preparing for revenge. When the Great Zapfish, Inkopolis' power source, disappears, Captain Cuttlefish, a veteran of the Great Turf War, suspects the Octarians. He recruits an Inkling, dubbed Agent 3, into the new Squidbeak Splatoon. Agent 3 battles through Octarian strongholds, fighting bosses and eventually defeating DJ Octavio with the help of Agents 1 and 2. Not so secretly, Callie and Marie, Inkopolis' first idol group. The battle inspires many Octarians to defect, realizing they no longer want to live under Octavio's rule. They begin escaping to the surface, seeking a new life among the Inklings. 2 years later, Callie mysteriously disappears after Callie and Marie grew apart due to their rising fame, along with the Great Zapfish being stolen once more. With Captain Cuttlefish and Agent 3 away, Marie recruits a new Inkling, Agent 4, to help her. After fighting through more Octarian defenses, Agent 4 finds Callie brainwashed under DJ Octavio's control. In the final battle, Callie is freed and DJ Octavio is once again defeated. At the same time, Agent 4 fights Octavio, defector Octoling Agent 8, who lost their memories, and Captain Cuttlefish find themselves trapped in the Deep Sea Metro, a facility run by an AI named Commander Tardar. Tardar, created by humans to guide future intelligent life, determines that Inklings and Octolings are unworthy due to their constant conflicts and decides to wipe them out. Agent 8, forced to undergo tests to retrieve their lost memories, eventually discovers Tardar's plan of blending survivors into a bioweaponized ooze to create a perfect life form. Just as Agent 8 and Cuttlefish are about to be executed, Agent 3 intervenes, but is knocked out in the process. With help from Pearl and Marina, Inkopolis' second idol group, Agent 8 escapes, and together they stop Tardar's final attempt to destroy all life. After returning to Inkopolis, it is shown that many Octarians have defected from Octarian society, and are now living among the Inklings as well. 5 years later, the world has expanded beyond Inkopolis into the Splatlands, a desert region home to Splatsville. When another great Zapfish vanishes, Captain Cuttlefish, now retired, recruits a new Agent 3 to investigate. DJ Octavio is suspected, but he denies involvement as his own army of Octarians has mysteriously gone missing. Captured and taken underground, Agent 3 uncovers Alterna, the very last human dome to have humans. There, they battle fuzzy, ooze-infected Octarians, uncovering that Mr. Grizz, a massive bear, is behind it all. Grizz, a remnant of Earth's past, seeks to restore mammals by transforming all sea creatures with fuzzy ooze. His plan fails when Agent 3 defeats him, and he ultimately accepts that the world has moved on without mammals. In a separate story, the same Agent 8 from before is trapped in the Memverse, a virtual reality created by Marina to help Octolings recover memories lost in the Deep Sea Metro. However, the system is corrupted by Order, an entity that seeks to impose absolute control. With Pearl's help, now in drone form, Agent 8 climbs the Spire of Order, defeating Order and restoring the Memverse to its intended purpose. That was a lot. Still, a lot of details were left out, so I highly recommend checking out this timeline video by JexST if you're interested in looking deeper into Splatoon's timeline. Although it's worth noting that this video was released before Side Order's release, however not too much would be different other than the lack of Side Order. So needless to say, there's a lot about the Splatoon franchise's story that goes under the general viewer's eye. But why is that the case? What makes the story and lore of Splatoon so obscure compared to other factors of the franchise? And the answer to that is how it tells its story. There's a lot of subtlety behind Splatoon's storytelling. Everything I just told you about the story are the very surface level parts of the story, the things you'd get from just casually playing through the single player campaigns. That's why the timeline explanation of mine was about 3 minutes long, while the timeline video going into depth on everything is 5 hours long. There's a lot of small tidbits and connections to be made by taking the time to look deeper, which is something the game actively rewards the player for doing. In the single-player campaigns, there's always some form of text and/or images that come from doing extra tasks outside of simply progressing the story, whether that be secrets in levels or taking the time to beat every level in an area. For Splatoon 1, 2, and 3's base game single players, if you discover the secret sunken scrolls, you get very diverse levels of information. The information could be anywhere from insights on Inkling culture to the reveal of the Great Turf War and the propaganda spread about Inklings. It gives large world building and important info that makes you see the world you play in differently. As for Splatoon 2 and 3's DLCs, you get chat messages and blogs from the characters, giving a slice of life into how these characters you work with interact, what their lives are like, and what their own thoughts are. It really helps provide small stories and connections to these fictional characters. In general, these secrets alone go very far to psychologically reward the player for doing more than simply viewing and doing things from the surface level. It helps the player build an emotional connection with the world from understanding it more. Even from looking deeper, there can still be stories and messages missed. Splatoon, as does most stories, requires the viewer to think deeper into things and truly understand what's happening and why. That goes to varying degrees, but nothing is exactly right there and written down. For example, there's strong emphasis on the propaganda of societies against each other to make one's own society look stronger. The obvious side is the way DJ Octavio constantly controls the minds of the Octarians against the Inklings. The Octarians view the Inklings as the bad guys because of everything negative they're taught about them, such as them being the toxic dominant species and that they hog all the power to themselves. However, the other side of the coin is the propaganda Inklings are fed. Most Inklings by the point of the first game barely think much of the Octarians, only ever really hearing about them in history lessons. However, one case in particular highlights the Inkling propaganda, and that's Agent 3, aka you from the first game. Captain Cuttlefish guides you through the first single player, having you simply view the Octarians as the enemies. Heck, the game itself is built around you simply viewing the Octarians as the enemy characters. You're not meant to really think of them as anything more until you choose to go deeper. After you find all the sunken scrolls in the first game single player, you realize that the Octarians stole the Great Zapfish because they were having a power crisis, and that Octavio was trying to provide for his society and not just trying to make a stance against the Inklings. Over the course of the game, if you decide to look deeper, you can slowly inch your way to a less Inkling-biased point of view of the world, by getting insight into the whereabouts of the other side and seeing the Octarians as people too. And this small thing in the Sunken Scrolls ended up leading to a massive insight into Octarian culture with Splatoon 2's Octo expansion, literally from the perspective of a defect Octoling. It's really cool to see how this idea, only presented in the Sunken Scrolls, evolved over time, getting very direct plot relevancy later. Although it was easy to think at first glance that Splatoon 1's single player is just a stereotypical bad guys steal good guys' possession, get it back plot, it turns out to be much more than that. And that's just one example of a subtly deeper plot. There's plenty more examples of these subtle stories around the franchise. With that in mind, it's important to realize that Splatoon doesn't necessarily have one direct main message. The main message of this franchise and all its underlying stories is whatever you interpret it to be. I know that sounds cliche, but I mean it in a very realistic way. In the same way how the real world works, stories and things to learn come from very different experiences, and it's up to you, the experiencer, to interpret the things that happen to you in life and what they mean to you. So whether it be a more grand story about the issues of propaganda and prejudice, or a small-scale story about moving on from the past and accepting change, the takeaway always depends on how much you engage, because in storytelling sometimes the most powerful messages aren't in plain sight, they just take a little digging.